else I can see. All right, it says we're live. Very good.
Great.
So we got our little PODLOMATIC episode 16. We're talking to a gentleman named Larry Holder, the creator of Time and Space, The Lunar Rise. Larry, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Larry Holder, as you just mentioned, and I am the author of Time and Space, Lunar Rise #1. The art by Rob Cannon. We are funding right now on Indiegogo. It's a original sci-fi fantasy story set on the first world that existed in the universe, and there's an ancient evil that rises out from the center of the planet, and the peoples have to deal with it. That's the general plot of the story. So,
okay. Now, mythology-wise, is this is this your first comic?
It is my first comic. Yeah.
Now, you would have been, I'm sure, a fan of comics before this. How long have you been?
Absolutely. Well, I started reading them when I was very young. I didn't really have a lot of access to them or anything like that, but my cousins would buy the odd issue of like X-Men, or there were stuff like that lying around, so I'd read the odd comic every now and then. I get more exposure to them through like cartoons and stuff in the 90s, I would say. Then I got sort of like into anime, so I was reading a lot of manga back then too, so more than anything, I'd say. Yeah.
And how did you conceive of this story, or when?
It started in high school, which would have been about 19 years ago.
Mhm.
So I originally started as sort of like a fan fiction for a Japanese RPG called Final Fantasy, which I'm sure most people are aware of. And then it sort of spawned off from it to its own thing very, very quickly. So when I got into college in the early 2000s there, I was going to animation originally, and I wanted to adapt eventually this into sort of like an animated project. That sort of didn't pan out for me. I didn't really make it very far in animation. So I went to a different school, and I ended up taking photography and getting into that for a while. But I was always writing this story sort of in the background. 2008 came along, and I was about to release it as something. It was going to be sort of like a novel with illustrations in it at some point, but that never happened. The group I was with sort of fell apart pretty quickly, and that brings us to here. And I've just been kind of working on it over time, and finally got a draft of the novel finished probably about 2 years ago for the first novel. And then I just I had a few friends in independent comics, and the whole Comicsgate thing happened. So I'm like, well, I'm gonna try to release it as a comic book because I think the style works better that way. I'm not like an experienced writer by any scope, so I figured adding the visual elements would allow me to just focus on the dialogue, and the descriptions could come out in the visuals, so I wouldn't have to sit there and write everything in an overly detailed manner. So,
How are you? I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's okay. Go ahead.
You mentioned that you're adapting it from a novel. Is lengthwise, how much of a comic issue corresponds to the length of a novel?
I guess it depends. This first issue just focuses mainly on the prologue of the novel. So it would be like the opening history, and then a little bit into the first chapter. Going forward, though, I think the way I've written the novelized version will adapt a lot quicker as it goes along, because there was so much description written in. I think it wasn't a very long book. Like when I wrote it, I think it was only about 14 chapters. So it's more like a light novel, I guess. So I think once I get going with it, it'll adapt a lot quicker. I'm hoping to have this first arc, the Lunar Rise, done in about 3 issues. That's my plan anyway. So.
And this project, like let's say on Indiegogo right now, which by the way, the link is in the description for anybody who wants to check it out. Um, the books that they'll be ordering, is it you say the Lunar Arc?
Oh, well, yeah, Lunar Rise #1.
Lunar
So
Rise, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah, that's okay.
The how many pages is the whole project for this funding round?
Well, this issue 1's 48 pages. So
Okay.
uh, issue 2 will probably be closer to something like 90 pages. I decided,
Mm.
only because I want to end it at a certain narrative arc. So uh, I'm going to write it until it gets to that point, I guess. So
All right.
yeah,
You mentioned that you're a Final Fantasy fan.
yeah,
Well, I'm a massive, massive fan of the series.
right.
How, I guess, as mutual fans, let's say, how would your book compare to, say, well, is there any particular entries in the series that inspired you, or just the themes overall of the whole series?
Well, themes overall, yes, but I would say the one I originally started writing it based off of was tactics, actually. So
Oh, that's a deep one.
yeah, yeah. So it has that sort of more in-depth sort of story going on into it. It sort of started where I wanted to make like sort of a sequel to it, but it has really nothing to do with it anymore, I guess. So
Hmm.
other than maybe like, actually no, I think pretty much all the elements of that have been pretty much stripped out. Because originally I had like the stones and everything like that in it, but that's all gone. So and
Okay.
actually, there's not really any hint of magic or anything in it left. So surprisingly enough.
Now, I wouldn't want to go into spoiler territory, but is
Mm.
there something in the description, let's say, of the Indiegogo that you could illuminate us about sort of the origins of this world, how it relates to, like,
Yeah,
for instance, Final Fantasy was all about magic crystals and that sort of thing, but
right,
really the politics and the relationships and countries and empires fighting over these magic crystals.
right. It really, yeah, it doesn't really have much to do with that at all. Surprisingly, this is more a creation story, if you will. Um, so it literally starts at the beginning of the universe and then goes up to a certain point. So like the first, I think 24, 25 pages are history, in brief, going through major events within the history, and then it sort of starts into the modern story, if you will. So I I,
Is
I,
that told?
I
Sorry.
really tried to put a deep prologue or like a deep history into it. I was very interested in the idea of starting something at the beginning and going um, to a narrative end, if you will. So
Is that told through a reliable narrator?
yeah, there's one character. He's the main character of the story. Onizia. He's the one telling the history, like the narrator. So, and he sort of narrates any points in the book that call for narration.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So when we read the origins of this universe, when he's, maybe you don't want to answer this,
Yeah.
he knows for a fact that this is how it started, or it's just a belief.
It's. I would say it starts off of somewhat of a fact history and somewhat of a belief for him. It's basically what he's been told, and even though he's telling this story from the end, if you will, uh, he still tells it as it was told to him, I guess. So there is a lot of mystery and sort of pseudo fact, if you will. I kind of want it. Not that the Bible's fake or anything like that, but I kind of want it to be biblical. I want it to be more like in prose, if you will. So
Uh-huh.
yeah,
You mentioned Comicsgate.
yeah,
I'm always curious to ask about how people encountered it and what they think it is, because I feel like we get a lot of different answers
right.
depending on who we ask. What do you think it is?
Well, I encountered it probably through Diversity in Comics, Richard C. Meyer. I started watching his videos when he started, basically, because I was reading a lot of Marvel at the time, and I just recently dropped all of my subscriptions to it at my local comic shop because for me it was the stories were getting really bad for one thing, and they were focusing way too much on these crossover events, and it was getting ridiculously expensive. There were all these books I didn't want to buy, so I said, you know what, the heck with it. I'm just not gonna order them anymore. So then I started sort of searching around, seeing if anybody else was experiencing this kind of thing, and I found him, and eventually it led into the whole like Comicsgate thing. I started watching Ethan Van Sciver more for his Star Wars content than anything else. At first, anyway, and then it all sort of just escalated from that point, right? So
That's a similar. I guess I came in during the Last Jedi when all the everybody was salty about it, and
oh yeah,
I
yeah,
discovered Ethan's channel among many channels. I was just searching for reviews of the Last Jedi, and I thought his reviews were so funny.
yeah. I came in a little bit before that because I think it was more after the Force Awakens,
Mm.
but
This would have
yeah,
been around when we say Richard Meyer. He is the creator of which books?
Jawbreakers and what's this other one called? Iron Sights. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Now, for anyone, I'm sure the people listening know more than me about these things, but if I
Mm,
recall, he had a run-in with an individual named Mark Wade,
that's right. Yeah.
who is a industry professional, and if I recall, he just didn't like Richard Meyer and basically ran a smear campaign against him to the point where Antarctic Press, who was lined up to be the original publishers of Richard's books, decided to drop him, if I
Hmm.
recall.
That's right. Yeah.
And the lawsuit is still ongoing. I think Richard
Yep.
decided to sue Mark Waid over this.
Yeah. Which is probably the right course of action. Really. I mean,
Yeah,
um, you can't have people going after you just because they don't agree with. Well, actually, I don't even know. Like, he's never actually talked about his politics or anything. Everyone just assumes he's very right leaning or whatever. But
Mhm.
you know, that's just the way it is. Like, for whatever reason, Mark Wade decided to attack him, and that's where we are right now. So
Yeah.
yeah,
It's funny. There's politically speaking, there's for some people there's the far left, and
mhm,
everyone to the right of them is the far right.
right,
There doesn't seem to be enough room to play for like I always considered myself a mild centrist. I kind of
yeah.
sit in the
That
middle.
that's kind of where I sat for most of my existence too, I guess. But
Yeah. It's
yeah,
funny to hear. I suppose anyone who criticizes, excuse me, modern comics or has anything bad to say about the content is like some kind of right leaning. Maybe this is a post Trump thing, but like they got really nasty.
oh yeah, I think it's definitely a post-Trump thing. Like, I'm up in Canada, of course. So, but even up here, the derangement syndrome spread to the point where you couldn't even like discuss or talk about it. So
Now,
yeah,
I looked up. Let's see. So, okay, you say you're Canadian. I don't know a lot about the culture over there aside from what I read, which I assume is skewed. Um, but
probably. Yeah.
politically speaking, I think on average, Canada is more left leaning than the average in America. Or, I'm sorry, United States. I know we're
We're
both American.
yeah, we're pretty centrist, I would say. For the like most people up here, I would say probably land more in the middle.
Uh,
You've got your fringes. Of course, right now we've got someone in power of the country who is definitely left leaning. That'd be Justin Trudeau, and he's pushing a more left leaning narrative to the world about Canada, I guess. So
I see.
that's where I think that comes from. But before him, we had a conservative government uh, for 8 years or so, right? So yeah,
How does what's the comics industry looking like over there? I'm sure it's similar to ours.
yeah. I mean, we don't have big publishers. We don't have a DC or a Marvel up here. Most of the publishers are sort of more on the independent scale. And I would say like the majority of people are just independently funding their books on either Kickstarter or Indiegogo. At least the ones that I've met anyway. So
Is there because there's French speaking over there?
mhm.
I never pronounce it correct. Is there a bande dessinée? How do I pronounce that? Do you know? like French comics.
Oh, yeah, that's probably more in Quebec.
Okay,
We don't really see a lot of that in the rest of the
I
country so
understand.
much. Yeah, but see, in the province that I'm in, which is New Brunswick, we border on Quebec. We're on the east coast,
Mhm.
and our province is the only official bilingual province. This was decided back in the '60s or so. Um, Whereas Quebec is French first language, and the rest of Canada is English first language. This province is bilingual. Now, what that means is we're supposed to be sort of intertwined with both languages, but what it's done over the years is cause a big divide between the languages.
Mhm.
Surprisingly, yeah.
Well, I asked because I've recently fallen or re-fallen in love with an artist named Mobius,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
I can't find his books anywhere in my area, and I don't know if he's more known in French-speaking countries. Uh,
Probably, yeah, being where he was from France and stuff like that.
mm,
Actually, I just got a big pile of his comics there not too long ago from a local comic shop. So,
I'm jealous. I can't. Yeah, I've gone to every local shop in my area except for New York City, which I guess I have to do a pilgrimage over there one of these
yeah,
days. I can't find his stuff, but the reason I ask is, I guess in other countries maybe manga's been really exploding, and I like the idea of international comics
mm,
revitalizing what I think is sort of the dying American comics industry. Do you get a sense of that?
yeah. Like I was around for the big mm, anime manga explosion in the '90s, so uh, I definitely thought that the books coming out of Japan were better, and they're definitely more narrative driven sort of stories and stuff like that, and they always make them for like a long run. They don't make these short one shots. So they do sometimes, but most of the comics are meant to be serial, right? You have to read it from the beginning to the end. So
And I would even encompass manga with anime and gaming. Like you
hmm
mentioned, enjoying Final Fantasy a lot. In some ways, Final Fantasy is like just a really long manga series, and there's a lot of
absolutely, yeah,
crossover.
yeah.
What do you think makes manga or Japanese stories different than, say, a
uh,
superhero comic?
well, I would say it's definitely the attention to narrative and character and overall world building, I guess you would call it. uh, I think they just tend to take the time to flush things out a little bit more, whereas the American stuff is sort of more, well, it used to be more fast paced sort of storytelling where you'd have a conflict in one issue, and sometimes you get a multi issue arc, but most of the times it was there's a conflict at the beginning, there's the fight, and then the resolution at the end, right? That's generally how these comics go for the most part.
All within a single issue or a
All
couple.
within a single issue, yeah, like 24 pages. So,
Yeah.
uh,
I remember reading that manga artists, one of their biggest criticisms of an American comic is that they're too dense.
mm,
Manga, it seems, is meant to be read over many, many pages.
yeah, yeah. I
Um,
see. I think that's the same sort of thing. Like it's very condensed, right? So,
I would
yeah,
think so. Manga
yeah,
is also in black and white, so there's not as much attention paid to a single page or a single panel. You're not really supposed to, at least on your first read, you're not supposed to stare at a page. You're supposed to go quickly, keep reading, keep reading.
hmm
American comics, I suppose, historically are meant for you stop and you contemplate the page and you maybe spend 30 seconds on a page as opposed to with manga, five
Well,
seconds on a page.
I think that became the way it was, but I don't think that's how it started. I think it started it more as the same thing as manga,
Okay.
where you know it was sort of, well, I mean, if you look back at the stuff from the '50s and the '60s, it was definitely more simplified. They didn't have they had good artists and whatnot, but they didn't take the same amount of time as some of the artists do now per page. So,
And that's a shame, I think, in American comics, especially. If I, like, I'm in the middle of setting up a campaign of my own. And
hmm
one of the things I'm most worried about is that I'm going to spend more time on it than I should. The goal I always say is a page a day is a decent pace.
Mm-hmm.
But in Japan, they do 18 pages a week.
Yeah.
And American comics, for as much as we love American comics, I'm sure, like, I talk about Watchmen and stuff like that, but
Mm-hmm.
if it takes months to do a few pages, I mean, I know I can't make a living that way.
No, it's difficult, right? That's one thing I really do appreciate about the artist that I picked for Of Time and Space, Rob Cannon. He can produce, you know, his pages are detailed, but they're not overtly detailed. He can produce me 2 pages in a weekend, right?
Mhm.
So, he's got a more gestural style. Some people like it, some people don't. A lot of people tend to think it's quite nice, as far as what I've seen for feedback and whatnot. So
Mhm.
it's
Yeah, I
definitely
like.
more of a style that I like, but yeah.
It seems he paints with brushes,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of I won't say a lost art, but it's it's not something you see commonly very much. I
Not in
remember.
the books, no. Not in the comics, no.
No, I liked, for instance, Craig Thompson did a book called Blankets way, way back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
That was all brush, and he ended up with carpal tunnel syndrome by the end, if I recall, because they're just so hard to wield.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I think the art looks really nice.
Yeah,
Um,
it's. I mean, we were going for black and white at first, but it was more of a financial decision than anything else. So to go black and white, I prefer color if I can get it, especially his color, because he's got that really nice ink wash painterly look to everything that he does. So
and I noticed that's a stretch goal in the campaign.
yeah,
Color.
yeah, very important stretch goal. But
I would
I
think
guess
so, yeah.
at first I'd just like to get funded, but that's been a little bit of a struggle. Um, it's strange though because you see some books and they'll get funded within a few days. That probably has a lot to do with the creators, but uh, it's always kind of strange to see what hits and what doesn't, I guess.
What do you think is the secret, or what are the patterns you've noticed?
Mostly I think it comes down to your audience. If you have a large enough audience or you can reach a large enough audience, you tend to do pretty well pretty quickly. That's and everybody who I've been talking to that has been funded is basically saying the same thing. It all comes down to how many people you can reach. Uh,
Hmm. Let's see. There have been. I had a campaign a couple of months ago that went okay.
mhm.
I think a lot of the success was being able to jump on as many interviews as possible. Having, I guess, Twitter numbers a big audience. That's all helpful. They say like 10% of your audience,
Yeah,
roughly. I've heard this are the people who are willing to invest in your stuff. I don't know how true that is, but more smarter people than I have also said this.
yeah, that makes sense.
I don't know, but I do think that that number can be boosted if the quality of the work itself is really good, and there's always word of mouth.
Mhm.
Is your project what is it called? A flexible goal or a
Uh, yeah, I put it under flexible.
okay?
I kind of regret that decision. I thought, even if I could make 50%, I could probably finish the project and then move from there. But we're sitting at 30, I think, right now.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it hasn't moved in a couple days. So, uh,
There's still time in your project, right? There's
oh
like
yeah,
20
yeah.
something days, 3 weeks, I think.
I think 19 days I'm down to now. But yeah, it's about 2-3 weeks. So yeah,
Okay. Well, at the very least, everyone listening, if you could check it out and retweet the link for the campaign, I'm sure we can get a few more eyes on it at least.
for sure.
I mean, I think the trick to these campaigns really is a having as many eyes on it, but also, oh geez, like there's a certain charisma thing that I've noticed with
Yeah,
drama and
that definitely helps. Like if you're an entertainer, naturally, then you'll entice people a lot more easily to purchase it for sure. Yeah.
Well, it's unfortunate because I find a lot of creative people are not great salesmen. And I
Yeah,
know I'm definitely not a good salesman, but that's, it's just my personality. I prefer sitting quietly at my desk with music on than talking to people and being
yeah,
the guy with the wagon, opening up all these like potions. Please
yeah.
buy some.
I mean, yeah, I do. I definitely struggle with that too. I've gotten a lot better over the last few years, but I was definitely extremely introverted growing up, and it's taken me a long time to kind of break that and become more sociable. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's still always there in the back of your head. Uh, the nervousness or whatever you want to call it. So that can come through when you're talking to people, but it's pretty difficult, I would say. Like, you're either a very talkative people person or you're not. Like, there's really no way around it. But
Mhm.
the problem is a lot of creatives are more introverted, right? They have a hard time speaking to other people
I
because
would
there's
say so.
yeah, that's part of the reason why I think they became creative in the first place. But that's just my personal opinion. It just seems to be a norm with creative people, I guess. So
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
I think there's a rare, super gifted person who is both an excellent creator and super extroverted,
yeah.
but I wonder how rare that is. Because maybe the pattern that I've noticed over the years, I try to keep an eye on these things as best I can. You get the really talented introverts who sit at their desk all the time or are always in their own head, and they have these conversations with people just in their own head. So let's take, for example, I knew someone who was really shy, who I would joke around with. We would be at a social setting, and I would look at her and say, "You're talking to everybody in your own head, aren't you?" And this person was notorious for never speaking, but I realized they're listening to every conversation, not just
Right.
a few conversations, and they're absorbing everything. And I think that kind of power is excellent for a writer, for example,
Mhm.
where you're
Yeah,
able to, yeah, you
yeah.
create these, in a silly way, I put it, like I create these little sock puppets who talk to each other. But that's because I listen very intently to every conversation I participate in, or I try to.
Yeah, I would say I'm the same way. I'm always the person they always say, "Oh, you're very quiet." And I'm like, yeah, but I hear what's going on and I do absorb a lot of that, so
Yeah. Well, that's
yeah.
an important skill, I think. I mean, there are creators who are super extroverted, not to say anything bad about extroverts.
Mm-mm.
But I feel like the stories that they write are maybe more, I won't say a negative word. I had an episode earlier today where I say things I regret. But if a deeply introverted person, like say George R. R. Martin, who I think he's
Mhm.
introverted, he wrote volume after volume of his books, and he almost can't seem to find enough paper to write on.
Right.
Whereas the salesperson who is excellent at selling their books may be able to sell more copies than an introvert, but that doesn't necessarily mean the quality of their books is better. And that's my jealousy speaking, because I wish I was a good salesman. Uh,
Well, no, I mean, like, I know exactly what you mean though, right? You do see it a lot, especially in Comicsgate. The really out there, people who have podcasts running every day type of thing, they tend to sell in the first 30 minutes, right, of
I
putting a campaign up. So yeah.
well, that's yeah. I'm jealous of that. Not
Mhm.
of their numbers. I think they've earned every penny of it. But
For sure, yeah.
I wish I could be and have that kind of be that outgoing and have that kind of energy. I think an hour interview a day is to me exhausting, but these guys can be on streams for hours and
Yeah,
with dozens of people on the stream at once. I can't imagine doing that.
I think it detracts a little bit though, because you have some people they're streaming all the time and they're not getting a lot of work done. Uh,
Yeah, that's true.
but and of course their books end up being late or whatever, but they do get it done eventually. But that energy sort of redirects itself, right? But then you've got my favorite example right now of somebody who's sort of trying something different, trying to get work done and have a show is Doug TenNapel.
Ah,
Uh, I don't know if you've been watching any of his streams lately, but a lot of his streams are he'll work on a page and then he'll have people on talking to him while he's working on the page, and when he finishes the page, his stream's over. So that's a really interesting way to do it. So
Is it just him on the stream, or he
no,
invites?
he invites guests on to talk to. So, but it's
Oh,
just
good.
him. While he's talking to everybody, he's working on the page he wants to get done, and
That's a good
then
idea.
yeah, so he's given himself a goal of 2 pages a day, and so he usually has 2 streams a day.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's the Earthworm Jim book, of course.
Yeah, that's the Earthworm Jim book. Yeah. So it's really interesting. You get to see him start, and he'll have all his pencils done, and then he'll just be inking the page or whatever. So
I'm gonna have to tune in and see about that. That's
yeah, it's pretty
really
fun.
impressive. I don't know how he can concentrate doing that. I can barely listen to music when I draw.
I guess he's just the type of person who just needs noise to work. But yeah.
I like noise, but only to listen. If I have to speak, like I've been on a couple of streams where they've had people drawing, and I don't know, it's sort of a competition kind of thing, I guess. They pick
Yeah.
draw a Black Widow or something. And as I'm drawing, I'm trying to talk or think of things to talk about, and I can't. And I just feel like I'm a third wheel. Like it's really awkward and embarrassing. And of course, these are super professional, really intimidating guys. I don't know what to say. I don't know any of them. But I really like Doug's. He's got so much energy. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. And he I was on a stream once there last week, but I was at work while I was on it, so I didn't really get a chance to talk very much.
Wow.
So that was interesting, though.
Did you jump on his stream to promote the book?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, and actually, I got a couple backers off of that, so he definitely has some reach in his audience. Not so much like an Ethan reach, but he definitely has some influence and some reach there. So it's good to get on the big shows if you can. They're hard to get on, but even some of the smaller shows, like I don't know if you've been on John Malin's show or
I was. Yeah.
oh, you were. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, John's pretty good. He's good at promoting. Edwin, of course, Edwin Boyette, really good at promoting. So
I remember the only reason I was able to get in touch with everybody is because of the super chats, and then I started. I tried, advertising the book through the super chats and stuff. So I'm gonna have to look into that in the next week or so.
Yeah, sometimes you just gotta cold call people, if you will. Just shoot them a message and see if you can get on. Like I got on Antonio Bryce's show a couple weeks ago. I never talked to him, but I've always seen him on streams and stuff like that. Super nice guy. We got along really well. So
I'll do that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask some more about local comic shops.
Sure.
Let's see. Are they? I guess it's silly to ask about the differences because what would either of us know about the other? I suppose, unless you've spent time in America. Darn it! I keep doing that. United States. What's the culture like in the local shops? Are they sort of struggling, you think? Can you tell?
They would probably be struggling, I would say. But they've kind of converted more into not just comics, if you will. A lot of them will sell merchandise, action figures, board games, tabletop games are really big right now. Yeah. So, excuse me. The one that I go to, it's called Strange Adventures. It's been around for years up here. It's the oldest comic shop on the East Coast here, and they started in another city, and then they expanded out into a couple other cities. So that's been my local shop for years. But they're very small. Like it's not a big shop. You go in, it's like a tiny little space, just packed wall to wall with stuff.
Do you carry indie books?
They do carry the odd indie books, but what I was gonna say is they tend to lean more to the left side of the publishing right now. They're industry friendly, I guess, if you will. So
yeah, I perceive that's going to be an enormous challenge. Like one of my goals is to try to get my stuff into local shops, and I don't know if they would even want to carry my stuff.
Right.
Like if they Googled me.
Well, I mean, I'm friendly with them. So he did say, like, once you get your book out, you can bring some copies in and we can discuss whether or not you can put it on the shelf. So I said, well, there's nothing in it. that's remotely political. So I mean, like, it's so far removed from modern politics that I can't even describe it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, sure, it's based on, there are things in it that are based on historical regimes, if you will, and movements and things like that, but nothing like overtly in your face, like you know, these Nazis or whatever. No, there's no Nazis in it or anything like that. But
Gotcha.
I would say the Angelos Society, the one that our main character is part of, it's more sort of Roman based than anything else.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's an emperor, and he sort of controls everything that's going on. And in most cases, I sort of wrote it as more of like a communist society, I guess, if you will, where everyone has been designated roles and stuff like that. So yeah.
We have a question up here from Seka. Have
Yeah.
you heard of Bakuman?
Pokemon. That name sounds really familiar, but
It's drawn and written by the creators of Death Note.
oh,
It's
okay.
a manga about drawing manga. That's well, they asked about it, and yes, I have heard about it, Seka, and I actually have to go back to reading it. It was a lot of fun, but it was also upsetting me because I wanted to draw manga so badly,
Hmm.
and the United States just didn't have any openings for that at the
Yeah.
time. Um, let's see. I want to talk about a little more. Well, we don't have to, but I'm interested in our mutual appreciation for Japanese storytelling. I wonder
Sure. Yeah.
if you want to talk about Final Fantasy a little bit, since it's an inspiration for your story.
Yeah. It's been an inspiration and kind of an obsession of mine, I guess, over the years. I've probably posted a few pictures around of my collection. It's ridiculous. Uh,
Tell me about it.
well, I own pretty much every North American release of the games, I guess. I'm missing like a couple, but that's just in more of a collector thing. I do play pretty much all of them though, except for maybe the online ones. I got them. I just never really had a chance to play them very much. Always too busy. But uh,
14 was kind of a weird experience as a fan of the series.
yeah,
The story to me is non-existent. It was pretty much skippable, and
yeah.
but the gameplay was super fun. I found it to. It feels like an arcade brawling game.
This
Like
14 is, or
14. Well,
yeah.
the remade 14. I didn't play the original.
Okay, yeah, yeah. The original. Well, I mean, I do I have a copy of that? I don't think I ever got a copy of that one. But yeah, the original was very much like Final Fantasy 11. Um,
Yeah.
it was almost like just an HD version of it, but worse, I guess.
Yeah, it
Somehow.
had a lot of performance issues, and a lot of people said it was slow.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
So 11 was pretty fun. I actually did get a chance to play that a bit back in the day. And I was playing on my PS2, so that should date that. Uh, but I didn't get a chance to play it till about 2006 or something like that, because that
mhm.
was when I had decent internet and whatnot. So, so yeah, I did
Well,
get a chance to play that for a bit. So,
well, one of the most intimate questions you could ask a fan is, "What was your first game?" But also, I want to couple that with the question, "What was your favorite in the series?"
okay. First game was 4,
Okay.
technically, or 2, if you want to call it by its original release over here.
Yeah.
Uh, then I played, 6, and went back and played 1. So favorite is 6 for sure. There's no doubt in my mind about that. uh, and it's been my favorite since. It's come close to being replaced by other titles, but not. It still holds.
Which
Uh,
ones are the close runner-ups?
12 for sure. 12 was absolutely excellent.
Mhm.
Yeah, and 7 and 8 and 9 are pretty close too. But yeah.
Okay. Now, I know this is going to get into nerd talk for anyone listening, so I apologize.
Mm,
But Yasumi Matsuno is the writer and director of both Final Fantasy Tactics and partially Final Fantasy 12.
mhm.
Do you think his writing style, his storytelling style, is especially notable in this series, and was it an inspiration?
Definitely. 12 was really well done. I know a lot of people complain about Vaughn kind of being, pushed into the background as a main character,
Mhm.
but I think he was written more as an observer character than anything else, right? And it didn't really bother me at all when I played through it the first time. It wasn't until much later on when people started complaining about it online. Uh, so
Mhm.
it's the same with anything. Like I've noticed a lot of hatred towards 7 lately. I don't know if it's because of the remakes been coming up or what, but
Mhm.
7's okay. But there was this time, probably around 2006, where people started calling it overrated and whatnot, I think.
Yeah, I
And
guess it was trendy.
yeah, I kind of agree there. It's a good story, it's well written and stuff like that, but I think what they're doing to it is kind of maybe trying to expand it out a little bit too far. Uh, like the compilation was almost a little bit too far.
Like
It's
Cerberus and all that.
Yeah, like Dirge of Cerberus, I actually kind of enjoyed, despite the fact that it's not a really great game or anything. But
Mhm.
I actually did enjoy the story in that game. It was so hyper anime, if you will,
Mhm.
but it was really good. Like it was fun. It was, except for maybe like the odd boss fight in the game that annoyed the crap out of me. I got through it no problem. I didn't find it as bad as people were making it out to be. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, I found it playable.
yeah,
I kind of went into it expecting a disaster, and then I kind of was kind of surprised by like, oh, I actually don't hate this.
yeah.
I had a similar experience with Lightning Returns,
Oh yeah,
which would lead into my other nerd question, if you don't mind. I actually couldn't stand 13 and 13.2, but I loved Lightning Returns. Which of the series do you think are overrated? Or is
overrated.
there a black sheep that you like that everyone else hates?
Well, I like 2, surprisingly.
Mhm.
Everyone hates that because of the battle system, but I really liked Final Fantasy 2. Some people say the story's crap or whatever, but I liked it quite a bit. I don't know if it's because it's so similar to Star Wars or what it is, but
Huh.
uh, you know, um, I think it's because it's so underrated or so overlooked in the majority of the series.
Mhm.
That might be why. Like you don't see a lot of the characters or media branching into other things other than like some of the mobile games and stuff. But yeah,
What do you think of the current state of the series?
it could definitely use a good boost. I know what's going on, and I think the problem is they're trying to grab too much at the same time, if you will. So they got really into these multilateral story arcs, is what they call them, I think, where they're releasing the story in different parts on different systems, trying to like tie it all together.
Mhm.
And then all it ends up doing is fracturing everything. I think 15 was the worst offender of this. Like I really like 15. Once you get into it and you start learning a lot of the backstory and stuff like that,
Mhm.
but you got to know what's going on in the movie. You got to watch the animated series. You got to watch or you got to play the side game. You got to play Comrades. Like they split it up way too much, right? Like,
Yeah, I think so.
yeah,
That was my major complaint, is that maybe there was a good germ in there with the presentation, but
hmm
it was between handing it off between two different directors, and there were so many problems with the production that it just could not have been a. It was a very patchy project. I couldn't finish
yeah.
it actually. I just found it to be too.
Well, there were actually like 13 directors, I think, that in total that worked on that. Because if you tie into the mobile game, A King's Tale, there was Justice Monsters 5, which was just sort of a tie-in, but it's in there. There was the 2 animated series. There was the CG movie Kingsglaive. There was, oh geez, Comrades had a different director, and then all the DLC that came out had different directors. So yeah,
Jeez, what a
yeah,
mess.
yeah.
Meanwhile, did you ever play the well, Lost Odyssey, let's say.
Oh yeah, I own Lost Odyssey still.
Okay,
Yeah,
I always consider that the real Final Fantasy 13, as far as I'm.
I used to call it that too. That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I miss, and I'm sad by the way that Japanese developers or business people do these things. Like once they have a
Mhm.
split, it's like this ugly. Like I think when Yasumi Matsuno left Square Enix and when Sakaguchi left, and of
Yeah.
course Uematsu, that was like they were the beating heart of these companies.
Hmm.
I thought it was such a tragedy. And Nomura's okay, but I think he needs to be kept on a tight leash. I don't know what's going to happen
Hmm.
with the remake. It's weird.
I don't know about. See, he's a really creative person. Obviously, he's got a lot of good ideas, but he doesn't really ever follow through on them too much. That's the problem, which is kind of, in a way, he's kind of like me. Like I always came up with a lot of ideas, but I never really followed through on them until recently, right? Uh, the problem was when you're with him, with me, it's just me drawing on a piece of paper. With him, he's literally wasting millions of dollars every year doing this stuff, right? And then you got to wonder, like, well, I always look at Kingdom Hearts 3. How long did it take? It was 12 years, something like that, between 2 and 3.
Maybe. It was
I
definitely a long time.
Yeah,
And he was juggling other projects. I don't know
yeah,
who, from a business perspective, strict business, I think whoever allowed him to do that should have been fired.
yeah, yeah.
It's,
I
you,
agree.
you can't let a creative person like that, he has to be on a leash.
Yeah,
Or
I
he's going
agree.
to waste unbelievable amounts of money, which he did. I don't know. He's not working on anything else besides the 7 remake. Uh, but I'm glad like Kingdom Hearts 3 was finished. I'll reserve my
Well,
judgment on that. But
I think he's working on the first DLC patch for Kingdom Hearts 3 or something like that too. But anyway, yeah, pretty much they've limited him to work on the 7 remake right now, which is good because you're right. He needs to be on a leash. I don't know what Versus 13 would have been like in compared to uh, 15. We'll probably never really know, but I don't think it would have been that much more groundbreaking, if you will. So
oh, I see.
yeah,
I'm one of
uh,
the people who like I'm really sad because like it
yeah,
reminded me of games like The Bouncer or something. It
yeah.
was so Nomura-fied, and I was curious. And then I read about the original story of 13. I'm sorry,
Versus
Versus
13, yeah,
13. And
yeah.
the original story sounded so cool. But
It tied more into the Fabula Nova Crystallis legend for sure,
yeah.
which would have been interesting. And a lot of those elements still exist in it, but they kind of wipe the ties away, if you will. So
Well, that actually ties back to the campaign, and I guess we're nearing an hour. I want to just talk about your campaign a little bit more,
sure.
because of the origins of these fantasy stories. What do
Mhm.
you think? Well, I guess I can ask you about you, not about what do you think Nomura is doing. When you do an origin story for a universe, like what are you reaching for? What kind of story are you inspired to tell, and where is it going?
Well, part of the reason I wanted to do this was to make my own sort of universe that was incredibly consistent, if you will. One thing that drives me crazy in a series is when they start breaking continuity and
Hmm.
doing all this weird stuff with characters that change personalities and stuff like that. Um, Final Fantasy VII is a really good example, but I won't get into that. Uh, like that, when they started the compilation, they definitely changed a lot of the continuity of the series. So
It's true. It passed
yeah,
between many writers' hands.
yeah, but just the visual elements and stuff too. I don't know. A lot of that stuff really bothers me on a creative level for some reason. Maybe it's all these years of these long running series, and you start getting into the nitty gritty of stuff, and you realize this isn't really all that consistent when you look back on it or whatever. So that was kind of a driving force of me starting it from the beginning, because originally I had started the story sort of more in the middle, um, which would be part 2 or episode 2 or whatever you want to call it. And as I was writing, I had written this backstory, which was maybe like 2 pages. And that's sort of what this book has become, because it just kept expanding out and expanding out and expanding out. And I didn't want to get into like a Star Wars prequel situation where I had to go back eventually and, explain it out more in a different story, and then try to make it fit. So I said, I'm just going to start from the very beginning and then go forward. I think that's the best way to do it.
I see.
Yeah.
And do you envision that this might become, well, I guess it all depends on funding, but I'm sure it will exist in some form.
Yeah, it will. I definitely plan on getting this book out regardless of funding. It will probably take a lot longer, just because I'll be financing it mostly myself, and I've already put quite a bit of credit into it so far. But yeah, I want it to be completed. It is a 5-episode arc. I've had it planned for quite a while, so there's at least 5 parts to the story, and however many multiple issues within those parts have to come out. So
I see.
yeah. Now part like 3, 4, 5 aren't quite as thought out as much as the other two or right now, but I have been going back into my notes where I had everything laid out and kind of expanding on it and writing new sort of narrative arcs and stuff like that for it. So,
well, if anyone's listening, of course, now or later, usually I get more listeners at the end after these live streams. But again, the link is in the description. I would encourage everyone to not only look, but also tweet about it. Let your friends know. Get everyone to take a look at this project. It looks really interesting. Is there anything you'd like to plug? Do you have a YouTube channel?
Well, I do have a YouTube channel, and there are several videos about the project on there, as well as some other stuff people might be interested in. If you like cosplay and stuff like that, I used to do a lot of videos like that. My YouTube channel is Point of Light Productions, where it's Point of Light Prods, because YouTube didn't have enough space for productions at the end of it. But I also have a website called Point of Light Productions, and there's various links on there to all these projects and things like that. So
you mentioned cosplay as one more question, I guess.
Yeah.
You do photography?
I was trained in photography in art college, and I did it for many years, and I still kind of dabble in it. I kind of moved away from it a couple of years ago, just because I'd gotten into doing a lot of cosplay stuff, and the convention scene was getting a little bit dramatic, if you will. I'll just put it that way. So I just kind of wanted to get out of it. So
I see.
Yeah.
Darn, I would have asked about that if I'd known. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's fine. But if you have any questions just before we go, then
Sure,
I'll be happy to answer. Yeah.
I'm curious about what the conventions are like around where you are.
Pretty much like everywhere, but a lot smaller. A lot more, tight, and more recently, probably more left focus center than just general. They tend to be going more in that woke area, if you will, to the point where they've started banning people I know and stuff like that, and
because of their social media,
because of their politics, because of their beliefs, whatever you want to call it. I just went to one that I've gone to, except for last year, I've gone to since the beginning. So like 5, 6 years in a row. And I went there to promote the book, and just because I don't know if it's just because I associate with this particular person who was banned for speaking his mind one day, I was relegated to a pretty shitty spot. So I didn't have a lot of traffic down my area. So
that's pretty toxic.
Yeah, I don't know. It could just be where they landed me, but I had asked to be beside an artist that I'd worked with on the book, and he was like in a completely different section. So yeah.
Now, conventions around here are hard to get into, but I think that's just a sort of, maybe I live in a very dense area or something like that.
Is that which area is that?
The New York area.
Okay, yeah, they're pretty heavy there. So
it sucks. Like every convention I apply to, I basically I have a less than like 30% chance of getting a table.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this for 10 plus years.
We're here. It's like there are maybe like one or two conventions like that, but for the most part, they pretty much they always have spaces open here. It's ridiculous sometimes, but then again, there aren't a lot of people here buying and selling. That's the problem, though, right? So yeah, you can go in, but every time I've ever done a convention, I've never come out on top, if you will. So
Yeah, I've always lost money at a convention.
mm-hmm.
I don't know, and yet I can't get into them. So maybe
Yeah,
I don't know. Well, I don't know what it is, but I want the. I think part of the charm of this little indie movement we have here is getting to all know each other either on social media or getting to meet in person.
mm-hmm.
Getting to I don't know. I was talking to Nerd Wonder a couple of days ago, and we were conceiving of. Well, she seems to be putting together a indie convention of sorts over in the Dallas area.
I've heard. Yeah.
Well, I would very much like. It seems that she's the one actually pulling the trigger on this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if anyone's listening. Again, like get in touch with her if she needs anything. I was encouraging her to do an Indiegogo. But do you think there will ever be? Do you think it'll succeed? Do you think people want?
Oh yeah, yeah, it'll succeed. I ran a small convention for 4 years for cosplay.
Mhm.
Now we were partnered up with other conventions so that we could kind of split costs and stuff like that. But it was pretty successful for the first couple years, and then it just died right off. Now part of that was certain people decided they didn't want to associate with me anymore or whatever. But
Mhm.
yeah,
What do you
and
think? I'm sorry.
oh, I was just going to say, and because it's such a small community, word starts spreading around, and then all of a sudden everything dries up, right? So yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
If there is, because one of the questions she had was logistical question. She doesn't actually feel comfortable because she's never done it before, I think. Actually putting it together. What are the logistics of putting together a convention from just
You
from the
need uh first step is funding. So you got to make sure that you have enough money to cover your costs. Um, so that could mean that you need to fundraise for like a year or two, even in some cases. I've seen people fundraise for 2 years just to open a convention. Um, I didn't really do that. I kind of went full swing in, which I regret doing because it was personal money and stuff like that. But the first year we ended up, with profit. But because I was partnered with this other convention for promotion, I said I would donate the profit to their charity or whatever, right? So all of the profit we made from the first year went to that, and then the second, third, fourth year I was operating under for profit, but we didn't make any profit. So, so money is definitely the biggest concern. Then you got to find a space, and spaces are pretty easy to come by, but it's all about hitting that sweet spot for timing. Now, up here where we have really long winters, uh, there's only really like 4 months of the year that you can get people out for these conventions and stuff like that. I find,
Hmm.
and there are some cases where they can do it later in the year or whatever, but most people try to hold them in the summer. So like May, June, July, August, sort of that time frame. It's probably different in Dallas. They don't really have the winter issue.
Mhm.
So, but then you got to think in, holidays, if people have any problems there. You don't want to schedule it too close to a major holiday or anything like that because no one will want to go. They'll be with their families or whatever. So, there's all these factors you got to take into account with timing. Then it's just logistics, getting people, uh, contacting people, getting them down there. If you can, if you've got the amount of money, you can pay for their expenses and things like that. But if you don't, you just kind of have to invite them and hope that they can make it. So,
Uh,
yeah, no, it's a lot of stuff to set up. So,
well, I'm sure Nerd would love if you reached out to her.
oh yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that's one of the dreams I would say. Aside from me, what the two things I want to do most with these books is be able to visit local shops
Hmm.
and to travel all over the country selling my stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I wanted to do too. Like,
Yeah.
I wanted to travel more to do photos, but monetarily it didn't work out very well for me. Yeah, that's the unfortunate part. So like the first convention I ever went to was in a big city. It was actually in Toronto, which is one of the largest cities in Canada. It's called Anime North. It's the biggest convention for anime up here. That was the first one I ever went to do photos at, and I was doing them for free at the time, just because I, completely unknown in that community and whatnot. And I had a great time. I was, locked to my area the whole time, but I met a lot of people. So, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like these conventions are better for networking than generating any profit.
And that's really what it comes down to, I think. The unfortunate side effect is if you only get a certain type of person in there, like a lot of the ones up here are trying to do, the networking doesn't really happen naturally. So you got to kind of, that's how I met a lot of friends up here, though. Like most of my friends are from conventions, I would say. So for meeting people and networking and stuff like that, yeah, it's great. That is the main reason I think to do these things. And if she does it in Dallas, I mean, it's a pretty easy place to get in and out of the airport and stuff like that. So as long as she can get the money and the space and stuff like that, it'll probably be a hit. So,
well, I'm going to make sure that I pimp it out every time I go on air. I think it's an excellent idea, and I think a lot of people would show up. It's just a question of timing.
Yeah. Timing and money, that's really what it comes down to for conventions, I find.
Even if she ran a solid campaign, I bet she could generate all the money on Indiegogo.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. See, the thing about her is she's pretty well known, I guess, in the comic gate sort of community right now.
Yep.
I think, yeah, if she pimped it out, she could definitely raise the funds and do it that way. That's probably the best way to do it, honestly. Instead of, a lot of the stuff I was doing around here was trying to do sort of grassroots fundraisers. We do like, I do like photo shoots, or I'd make like a calendar and sell it or something like that. It was just pennies, right? But this whole crowdfunding thing online, as long as you got the audience, well, nobody was gonna crowdfund for a little place around here, but down in Dallas with a well-known person running it, I think they might jump on that a little bit faster. So,
well, it's really the trick is just getting the people who want to meet. We would really meet anywhere, but Dallas seems as good a place as any.
Yeah,
it's relatively central. Everyone can travel there within a few hours, I would bet. But yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah,
definitely get in touch with her, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we've talked a few times, but I haven't talked to her about that. So,
good.
Yeah,
go ahead, and let's see what happens. But yeah, again, this is Larry Holder. One more time, the Indiegogo is called
Of Time and Space, Lunarize #1.
Yes, and the link is in the description. And yeah, we've got a whole week full of interviews today. So if you guys are listening today, come back tomorrow. And at the end of this week, I'll probably be launching my campaign. So we'll see what happens there if it's a complete disaster.
I think you'll be fine. I really like your artwork.
Thanks,
yeah,
we'll see what happens.
You've got a really unique style. It definitely like pops out at me when I look at it. So I think that's why I initially started looking at your stuff online, just when I was looking around at Comics Gate and indie comic related stuff. So yeah. I think you'll do fine.
Shucks.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to decide on how much do I ask for and all that stuff. But
that's the hardest part, I find.
Yeah. You don't want to ask for too much and seem greedy. You don't want to ask too little and screw yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of went in knowing only general things about pricing. So I don't know if I kind of price myself too low or what it is, but some people seem to think I have. But when I was looking into printing and stuff like that, I was like, I don't think it's going to cost me much more than this. So I just put it at, it looks like $11 in the US, but it's, I put it at $15 Canadian. That's the difference in our dollar there. So
yeah.
Yeah.
That's tough. Printing and finding good costs. I've heard that Canadian printers are less expensive.
Sort of. Yeah.
Oh, no. My local printer. I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say I find our prices are a little bit more for bulk and stuff like that, but it's still cheaper for me to get it printed here than it is for me to get it printed in, say, the States and have it shipped. Because once it hits that border, it's a whole nother game. You get all these extra fees attached to it and everything like that. So, yeah.
Well, small run printing is really expensive, and I think that's why a lot of Comicsgate books have a bad reputation as being expensive. I looked
Definitely.
into the prices of printing one colored book for Mary Sue, and it's just like I'm looking at the price, like I can't believe that it costs this much, but there's no choice. It has to be this expensive. I don't know what that means if someone saw it on a shelf at a comic store. Like, who does this guy think he is? But
Um,
that's
I don't know. Like, I have a friend up here who does. He kind of got me into the whole independent thing originally.
Hmm.
So he's a local creator. He's Larry Higgins. He makes the comic book Niobe. I don't know if you've ever seen it around or not, but
Sure.
yeah, it's. I mean, he's got a good following, but he's still pretty unknown for the most part in the general sense of things.
Right.
But he has 5 issues under him now. Um, he's doing pretty well, and he was actually the one who ran into some problems getting banned from the convention or whatever. But and it's not because of his book. There's nothing political at all in the books. So anyway, point is, he kind of got me into that, and he's just barely making the goals most of the time, but he's selling in the local stores too, and I think he sells his books for $12 or something like that locally, and they sell. So
Huh.
yeah, once you get that shipping cost out of the way, and you can sell it a little bit cheaper in the store, but
Yeah, there are a lot of costs. You're barely making profits on these books, so
yeah.
please do support your indie creators, everybody, if you
I mean,
can.
if you wanted to get into it to get rich, it's not the best industry to try to get into to get rich. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah.
There are very like a 1% of all people will ever make a lot of wealth off of it. But
A lot of these are passion projects, I suppose, but
yeah,
we got to do what we got to do.
exactly.
But yeah, I'm sorry for keeping you on for so long.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, again, guys, please check out the Indiegogo. It's in the description. Not subscribe, but follow him on Twitter. That link is also down there. And support his book. Let people know about it. And that's the best way we can get these books out on the street, is networking each other and helping each other out.
Yep, for sure.
So yeah, Larry, thanks so much for coming. Thanks so much to everyone for listening. I'll be here again tomorrow with another interview. I hope you have a great day.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Take care, Larry.